This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Senator Mark Norris on the upcoming legislative session tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by just one guest, Mark Norris, Majority Leader, State Senator. Thank you for coming back.
Eric, it's great
about
to
a year
be
or so,
here.
we think.
I think so.
So we have the whole session, just the two of us, talk about, or the whole show, talk about the upcoming session, maybe look back at some things. But looking into this upcoming session, you'll be Majority Leader again. There are super majorities of Republicans in the Senate, in the House, the governor's office. What are your priorities? What are the Republican priorities this coming session?
Thank you. The main priority is to pass a balanced budget. So many of our viewers don't appreciate the fact that unlike Washington, state government balances our budget each year. And as Majority Leader, I carry the budget and intend to do so again as required. But it'll be a special challenge this year. As we'll discuss, revenues as budgeted are off, and some of our expenses in essential areas, education, healthcare, are up. And so there'll be less of the taxpayers' funds to put to good use, and we're going to have to be very prudent about how we balance the budget.
We're about a third of the way into the fiscal year, the state's fiscal year. I think I read that. And why we're off? That was unexpected. People felt like the economy's picking up, and most of the state revenue comes from sales taxes. Correct? I mean, that's
right.
The vast majority.
One of the unanticipated downturns was in the franchise and excise tax, and we are currently attributing that to the fact that a number of companies paid estimated taxes where they overpaid, and so there are rebates underway, and that probably has more to do with it than sales tax at this point. But expenses will be up. In healthcare, our TennCare budget is growing, and we're going to have to find ways to pay for that. The national argument aside.
Yeah, I was going to say, that surprised me, and I've followed this stuff fairly closely, but Tennessee has not agreed to do the Medicaid expansion that's a part of Obamacare. Right. You mentioned it. Let's kind of start there.
Sure.
What is your take on that? I mean, should the state take that federal money and expand Medicare? Right now, it's, quote, free money. The federal government is going to give the various states who've opted in, which is, I think, about half the states,
right.
The full amount. Then there's a sliding scale that over the next 5-10 years, it goes down to where the federal government's going to fund maybe 90%.
Right, actually a shorter fuse, 3 years.
3 years, excuse me.
The answer is no.
Okay.
The state should not. And Governor Haslam just wrote a letter recently back to Kathleen Sebelius saying, you know, our conversations aren't going anywhere, and so it's sort of off the table for now. That can't be confused, though, with the fact that, meanwhile, back at the ranch, we have TennCare.
Yeah.
And we have Tennesseans who need to be attended to one way or another. So aside from Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, we find that as a result of the implementation of that, we now have what we thought would be about 47,000 new enrollees, those who were eligible but previously unenrolled.
Yeah.
Then we thought it might be 50,000. As we speak here tonight, it's more like 52,000.
And part of that's, I know nationally, part of that's because people go into the exchanges now that they're kind of sort of working, or at least working better, and they go through and they find out, or they meet with a counselor, or whatever they do, and they find out that they've been eligible for Medicaid for quite some time.
That's
I
right.
guess that's happening in Tennessee too,
That's
even though
correct.
the expansion wasn't put in place.
Correct. And so everything about the dysfunction in D.C. aside, we have a situation we have to deal with.
Yeah.
And so there are additional costs associated with that, several $100 million. And when you couple that with, as we speak, maybe $123 million less than revenue budgeted, you know, the combination there is a pretty significant factor, and we're just going to have to deal with it.
And again, I'm assuming you're here, but your colleagues, no one's really going to look at increased taxes. I assume.
Oh, no.
This is just not a legislator that's going to do that.
Oh no,
Yeah.
and it's not necessary that we do so. The governor's asked all the departments to report what their projections would be with additional 5% in cuts. He's managed this very well, and we've had good, solid budgets since he took office in the last 3 years. On the positive side, we'll have some additional revenue starting in January from the Amazon settlement, where they're going to begin paying sales taxes. And we have a fairly robust employment situation since Governor Haslam took office in 2011. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 140,000 new private sector jobs. Those generate revenue. So we're going to do fine, but we're not awash in taxpayer money.
We're talking about taxpayer money, talking about government spending, a little bit more of a local issue, although there's a state angle, which is pensions. Last spring, the state comptroller, I've been corrected by many viewers, controller, even though it's spelled comptroller, the state controller wrote a letter to the city saying, look, your pension, your accounts are out of balance. We're concerned, and we're particularly concerned about this unfunded liability on the pension side.
Right.
To some degree, I mean, some people have said Memphis is nowhere near the shape that Detroit is, but at the end of the day, the state kind of backstops the municipalities, Memphis included.
That's
so
right.
I assume that was sort of the opening shot to say, look, you guys have got to get things together. Just this week, in the last week, Mayor Wharton has come forward with a plan to begin to fund that unfunded liability over a 5-year period, starting at $20 million next year, $40 million, getting up to a really big number. $80 million within the city budget is a big number.
It is.
What are your thoughts on Wharton's plans and the state's involvement in the local pension issue?
Right. Last March, as a member of the Pensions and Insurance Committee that I serve on, I asked for the committee and the General Assembly to take stock of where all local governments across the state may be, not just Memphis, but other municipalities as well. The Department of Treasury, Treasurer David Lillard, and his staff have worked on that ever since. So for many months, looking at that, and we've met with Mayor Wharton to talk about the particular situation as it pertains to Memphis, and he's taking a giant leap forward in what he presents as we enter into the new year. There will be legislation requiring maintenance of effort by municipalities and other local governments. I'll sponsor that legislation at the request of the treasurer. And what we need to do is instill discipline in all these local governments. It's not just about Memphis, but Memphis being one of our big cities with a big problem has got to take some big steps.
Well, part of the switch that has been pushed and that is in the Wharton plan is to take they'll honor the obligation to retired and I guess vested employees, but for new employees into the city government and newer employees, people, I think it's less than 10 years, they move to more what the private sector has moved toward, which is a 401k, where it's a defined contribution. The city's going to put in X $100 or $1,000 a year, whatever it is, and it's going to fluctuate with the market, and that's what's going to be there at the end of the day versus the defined benefit where there's a guarantee what they're going to get.
That's right.
You like that idea?
It's the only thing to do.
Yeah.
That's the direction you have to move. The question is how far you go and how fast.
Yeah.
The state of Tennessee reformed its pension plan in 2013. We've already taken those steps. It's a hybrid. It's a combination between defined benefit and defined contribution.
And that's for, in terms of state workers, that's for highway patrol and people out you see working on the highways and so on and so forth.
Legislators and others.
Okay.
Right.
And what was the reaction?
Stoic, but resolved that it needed to be done.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear a great hue and cry about it. There was a lot of effort that went into it in terms of planning and working with different constituent groups. Some in the private sector here locally think that all governments should go further. No hybrid plan about it. Just go all the way to defined contribution and leave
Including
it at that.
those retired employees and the vested
Correct.
employees and so on.
Yeah. And for a variety of reasons, that's probably not practical. But we think, and the Treasury Department thinks, that moving in that direction, if not going all the way, is sufficient to right the ship of state. And we'll see.
Yeah, and for those who are concerned about the state, there's always this tension between the state involvement in local issues, federal involvement in state issues. Right. You all don't like to be mandated by the federal government to do X, Y, and Z when you don't have the funding for it or don't have the control over it. Are you comfortable that the state's involvement is appropriate?
Yes, and just as I was in the education space.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the state's responsibility. You can talk about local funding all you want, but to the extent that most of the funding comes through the state, and from the taxpayers, the citizens of the state. It's ultimately our responsibility. It's our duty to do it, working with local governments. But we need to make sure that the requisite degree of discipline is at work, and that the local governments are salting away for that
Right.
retirement day the funds that are needed. It's whatever metaphor you want to use, robbing Peter to pay Paul and that sort of thing just isn't going to cut it.
It's an interesting thing nationally too, because we're very focused here in Memphis, and there are the people who get Memphis is the next Detroit, or get down on Memphis. The fact is, we're so far away from a Detroit situation. The Wall Street Journal, I don't know if we haven't talked about this, but they've done a really great series on states and localities in trouble. I mean, Memphis isn't even close to the trouble that some of these places in California and Illinois and so on. I guess part of that for you is that's all well and good, but we want to stay there, and we want to keep
That's right. We want
stay
to
away
keep
from the
them
bottom
away.
of that list.
Keep them
Yeah.
away from that
Right.
precipice. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So sometimes it's sort of tough love, but we've met here locally, for example, with Mayor Wharton and Brian Collins. It's nothing personal.
Yeah.
It's just business.
Right. Well, and when Wharton was on the show earlier this year, right when that letter came from the controller and so on, and I asked him, are you glad the state stepped in? And he said, yeah. Because we needed that kick, I think. And other city council members, either on the record or off the record, have said on the show and said elsewhere that, yeah, we needed this because it was just going to be too hard for us to do it alone. This was the first warning, and then, like you're saying, some legislation, and the kind of, this is inevitable that this is going to have to happen.
Right.
When you look at, we're talking about cities and finances, and you mentioned the schools, and we'll come to that a little bit later, but your take on some of the projects and some of the spending at the local level right now, county, city-wise. The one that's most immediate is AutoZone, and I know that's not really a state issue, but you live in the community, you're politically connected. The baseball park, what's your take on that deal, and is it a deal that should be done by the city?
It's sort of to your earlier point. I mean, there are places for the state to assert the state's position and places for the state to stay out of it. This is one where the city council, the city of Memphis, they have to decide what they can afford. With the requirements of the pension reality and other post-employment benefits, with what Mayor Wharton is saying, he realizes he needs to put away to get up to that actuarially required amount. It's going to be for them to decide how the debt service works. I don't know enough about the particular stadium deal to say. I understand that they're saying it basically pays for itself when you account for the rental that's paid and so forth. There's no question on the positive side of the ledger, you need things to generate revenue too. I mean, you can only cut so far. So just as we have been working on workforce development issues, bringing in more jobs and maybe new employers or growing existing employers, that's all designed to bring cash in on the positive side of the ledger. So there's a lot in the mix, and where they separate these projects out, I don't know, but I know we're going to learn a lot more about it between now and January.
You don't want to say if you want the deal, yes or no?
No, I don't have any basis to say. Sorry.
All right. No, that's fine. That's fine. So we talk about incentives, pilots, a thing we talk about on the show sometimes, economic development generally, and the various local incentives, state incentives.
Yeah.
When Haslam came in, he got away from some of the programs that had existed more to these sort of cash incentives. The Shelby County and Memphis still do a lot of payment in lieu of taxes, which can be very controversial. Yeah. What is your take on that? That the best approach, because I think you've said, I know other state folks have said, that economic development on the big scale of recruitment is a state-local partnership. It has to be. There has to those incentives and the context and so on. Do you feel like the use of pilots in the Memphis-Shelby County area has been appropriate and is going in the right direction? I
think it's going in the right direction. It has not always been appropriate. Back to the time I served on the county commission, we had some heartburn over, for example, the degree to which funding that otherwise would have gone to education was being diverted. We took some measures to address that at the time. I think with EDGE, the new Economic Development Growth Engine, and other programs, they're moving in the right direction, but I think you always have to be sensitive to how much should government be involved in private enterprise. You're in competition with other states. And I know this as chairman of the Council of State Governments now, the national organization. There's a balance to be struck, but what we're trying to do in this administration is to get away from tax credits and that sort of thing, they get lost in the shuffle. They're hard to keep up with.
Yeah.
You're waiving taxes when other people have to pay for them, and deal more with a ready workforce
Yeah.
and other incentives that are concrete and sort of organic
Yeah.
to the area to attract. We've got a lot of natural resources here and amenities that make Tennessee the place to be in so many ways without giving away the store. So you have to be prudent. The Department of Economic and Community Development has their own metrics and their own matrix and everything to make
Yeah.
sure that we get the appropriate return on the taxpayer's investment, but you can't give away the store.
Yeah, isn't there also the reality that, people will compare Memphis and Nashville. Nashville doesn't rely on pilots as much. And we've had people on the show, I've talked to people with the paper who say, well, it's all well and good to compare Memphis and Nashville, but Memphis is right up against Mississippi. And Mississippi is open for business, and they will give you a credit, cash, and flowers to get your business to come to come across the border, and that unique situation where you can, if you're going to locate a business in Olive Branch, you can still take advantage of the Memphis airport, the Memphis Grizzlies, the amenities of a big city, while not having to be in Tennessee. Nashville doesn't really face that so much. Other cities don't necessarily face it. I mean, there are cities that do, but that's where I think people sometimes say the Memphis-Nashville comparison on these pilots breaks down. There's some unique issues. Arkansas is right across the river. Same thing. You can base something in Marion and take advantage of, without paying any taxes, the Memphis big city.
Yeah, and it's just a challenge. It's a daily challenge. There's a great team at work now. A lot of people didn't understand why the Haslam administration sort of reconfigured the way the Department of Economic and Community Development was set up. They went to these base camps. People might not even remember it, but 9 camps across the state. And that's one of the reasons, because the folks who are here get it. They know what we're dealing with here, which may be different from what they deal with in Nashville or Johnson City or some other place. So it's more customized to the realities we have here, and it's working. I mean, we've had some great developments. We've, like I said, about 140,000 new private sector jobs. The Unilever expansion, we're going to have, and of course that's in Covington and Tipton County, but regionally speaking, it's going to be the largest ice cream manufacturing facility in the world. They're consolidating all their North American.
Right.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there are a lot of good things.
Do we get free
Mitsubishi,
samples? Free sample? Did you work that into the deal?
Later offline, we'll talk about that.
Right. But we talk about workforce, though, and 2 big projects, Electrolux, Mitsubishi, they're ramping up. But already, I think the director of HR from, I believe it was Electrolux, and it might have been Mitsubishi, recently said they're having trouble hiring because these are not factory jobs in the old sense of picking up a widget and dropping a widget. I mean, they're pretty high-tech jobs actually, and pretty well-paid jobs in terms of. Does that concern you, and is that something where the state, through community colleges, through whatever, can work more closely to get skilled workers into these new facilities?
And we are. If your viewers haven't heard about Drive to 55 and LEAP, the Labor and Education Alignment Program that I authored and passed this year, or in 2013, both of those are designed to help Tennesseans simultaneously work, earn, and learn so that they get a certificate or degree while actually engaged in on-the-job training, whether it's an apprenticeship or the job they already have, aligning the education sector to work with local employers and say, well, if your employees are doing this, this, and this on the job, did you know that will qualify them for a certificate in advanced manufacturing or this or that? We're working closely with Unilever, with Electrolux, with the Bodine plant in Jackson. I don't think a lot of folks realize that in next year, all engine blocks made for Toyota motor vehicles in North America will be made in Jackson, Tennessee.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And I follow this stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, and we're still 3 years running. Number 1 in automotive manufacturing in the nation, right here in Tennessee.
You talk about programs. You talk about the state working and the schools working. You must have some Republican brethren in the House. There's some people very conservative who really basically view any government program as bad. So you're speaking here as majority leader and saying this is a good program. This is where the state should be involved. This is where we're working with business. But you must have some folks. I mean, all Republicans are not the same. All conservatives are not the same. They're different interpretations.
That's right.
And when you've got, I've met them up there. People who just think everything government does is bad.
Except their job.
Except their job, and their per diem.
That's right. That's right.
How do you manage that? Because it's not a ubiquitous group.
Right. It's more of an art than a science. I try to listen a lot and respect positions like those, differing opinions, and I think as a result we tend to end up with a better a better work product in the final analysis. But by and large, with a few percentage degrees of difference, we are all pulling in the same direction. I mean, we are #1 in the Southeast for job creation, the state of Tennessee. We have the lowest per capita debt of any state in the nation. There's a lot that is hard to argue with, that kind of success.
So you haven't felt pressure or undue pressure from, say, a Tea Party wing? I mean, the media loves to say that.
Yeah.
Tea Party's pushing Republicans farther to the right, farther to the right.
No, I've found some misperceptions. I've found some lack of information, lack of understanding sometimes from different sectors where they don't know. Perhaps we haven't communicated effectively enough.
Yeah.
All the good things that are happening, the kind of success that's hard to argue with. We've reduced the size of government every year in the last 3 years. We've cut taxes, not only the taxes on food, but the death tax is being phased out by 2016. We repealed the gift tax. Really, hundreds of millions of dollars in
Right.
tax cuts. All the
Right.
things that the most conservative among us.
And
have
in
said
other
we
words,
want to do.
workers' comp was a big priority, the reform to,
Tort
whatever you think about it,
reform.
but it was meant to be business friendly and recruit
Comp
people in
reform,
and,
that's right.
reduce the complication. We've gone 20 minutes, we've barely talked about the schools. It is your signature legislation, for better or worse. I think you would say for better. Are you happy with, satisfied with, what is your take on where the state of kind of the deconsolidation of the schools and the evolution of where we were and where we are?
I'm happy that the municipalities are moving forward with neighborhood schools. It's what their citizens, the parents of these children, wanted all along. I think that the education that's closer to the kids and their families is going to be better education. It's frustrating, sure, that it took 3 years
Right.
instead of 1 or 2 as originally outlined in our legislation to accomplish. But I think we're all going to come out better for it in the final analysis, and I find very few people who would disagree with that. There's been a sort of a metamorphosis, if you will, of what used to be the City of Memphis schools. We're not ending up with just the inverse of what we had before, because what was Memphis City Schools had a lot of difficulties that have now been purged, if you will.
Yeah, well, because we've talked about it a lot, and sometimes viewers get frustrated. We talk about the school so much, but it's just it's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's sort of the future. It's an economic development issue. It's a recruitment issue. It's a population shift issue. So it's just been a tremendous story with all these different angles.
It has.
And I do hear people say, well, we're just back to where we were, suburban schools, city schools. But it's really not that. I mean, because on so many levels, it is 5 or 6 different suburban schools, and Millington's a very different place than Collierville, with different income levels and different residents and different economic base. The city school system has been, I think most people who will calm down and kind of look at it say it's been pretty transformed. You've got the state ASD running the worst schools and making some headway. The city has put in this new innovation zone type district within a district that's making some headway. And all these charter schools, I mean, I've said, I guess I'm editorializing for a second, are going to change the face. For better and worse, not all are going to work out, but over the next 5-10 years, it's a whole different deal.
There's a lot more flexibility. The schools, the delivery system, I think as a result will be, for lack of a better term, more nimble in its ability to meet the particularized needs of the students they're teaching. We learned the hard way that one size doesn't fit all, and that's really all we advocated for the last 10 or 15 years. Is we needed the freedom to be able to individualize teaching, to get to kids where they need it most and in the ways that they understand and will advance. And we're now seeing, Tennessee is in the lead right now nationwide in advancement in test scores and things. We're really making great strides, but there's a lot more work to do. If you talk to Chris Barbick and folks at the Achievement School District, they'll tell you that right now, Memphis, Tennessee is known as Teacher Town. This is the place that teachers want to be.
Memphis Teacher Residency Program has been at the
it's great.
Crosstown, and I mean, and that's another thing that there was so much going on with schools and education reform that everyone would say, well, that's Norris Todd, the bill that you authored. But actually, there were all these parallel issues of changing the way tenure and seniority and the negotiating. Again, teachers unions don't like it. I won't take a stand on that, but it was a radical change that sort of got missed. The change in the way teachers would be paid, assigned, negotiate contracts had nothing to do with Norris Todd. It just happened at the same time.
That's right. And we needed to move. I mean, we're going from almost at the bottom of of the pile nationwide. We're now we're moving on up, and that's what we need to do, and we've got a lot further to go.
We got just a minute and a half left. You, annexation moratorium, you chair that commission. I think you guys just recently came out and said, let's keep that moratorium in place for another year.
For another year.
Okay.
It's all part of the old Public Chapter 1101 and the Growth Planning Act. And now whether the General Assembly agrees with that or whether they forge ahead to amend the law to allow everybody to vote on annexation rather than annexation by ordinance. I mean, there are a lot of us who favor that.
Favor which?
Favor the right to vote.
Yeah.
I'm one of them, but as chairman of the advisory commission, I also realize that there are collateral issues and ramifications that go along with that. If a city's been counting on its right to expand in an urban growth area and all of a sudden the General Assembly takes it away, what, if any, effect does that have on the city's growth plan?
Yeah.
You know,
just a couple more, just 30 seconds here. Guns and bars, guns and restaurants. Where else are we putting or not putting guns in the next session? Any ideas?
I think we keep them wherever folks have the right to keep and bear them.
But are there any new places that are going to be allowed?
Somebody will file legislation about it because they always do. But the Second Amendment will be upheld, I assure you.
And any last year there was some big funding. I think you were very proud of for the medical school here at UT and for the University of Memphis. Anything more on that front?
No, we continue to work on higher ed though, and stay tuned. Have me back. I'll tell you some.
Okay,
great
we will.
stories.
Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.